Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about accessing the Shamatha Jhanas. So the Shamatha Jhanas are the concentration states in Buddhism. So building up concentration states to go successively deeper and deeper into meditation. This is contrasted with the Vipassana Jhanas, which are really based on insight training, on Vipassana. So the Shamatha Jhanas are sometimes referred to as the Jhanas, and it includes the material jhanas, which are the rupa jhanas, the sort of material states, and then the arupa jhanas, which are the immaterial states. So an example of the material jhanas are like the first jhana, where you're experiencing this bodily bliss or rapture that is happening. An experience of a formless jhana, or the arupa jhana, is one where you experience a boundless sense of space. And so when you're developing your skills in Buddhism or in meditation in general, and you're using concentration practices to develop that, you want to go into these successive deeper states, and they become more refined. So from the more material side to the more immaterial or formless side of meditation. Now, it's a common experience when students are first learning the jhanas that getting into the jhanas can take some time. And so folks can be sitting there for a while, sometimes up to an hour or several hours, where they're just waiting for that first jhana to come on. And if a student has come from a particular Buddhist lineage where the focus is more on the Vipassana than on developing the jhanas, what can often happen is the transition can be a little challenging. You know, with the Vipassana practice, you're really trying to pay attention to the sensations as they arise and disappear. And with the jhanas, you're trying to build up stable concentration states. So you're not worried about deconstructing them. What you're interested in is building them. So often students in Buddhism will be using a very simple meditation practice, following the breath. This anapanasati is a very common one. And that works extremely well for Vipassana, right? Because you're paying attention. If the breath is an object, you're paying attention to the sensations as they arise and disappear. And so you can get all sorts of insights into the breath and so on. You're using Vipassana as a tool to get insight into the breath, right? And into the impermanence, into the intrinsic dukkha or suffering, into the no-self aspect. But when you're developing concentration states, that approach is not the best practice approach. So as a result of just following the breath and trying to use breath as an object of meditation, often the jhanas don't come on. It can take quite a while. Now, there's a scientific reason for this. And the reason for this is because when you're going into a concentration state, into a jhana, you need to leverage the body's parasympathetic nervous system to get there. Now, the reason why students may find difficulty in getting into the jhanas is because they're simply breathing too quickly. So our average resting breath rate is around 12 to 20 breaths per minute. And so this average resting breath rate is about 3 times what it was in the 1940s and 1950s. As a result of that slower breath rate, people were more likely to be able to get into a meditative state by just following the breath. But today, we're breathing about 3 times as fast. And the impact on that is that we don't engage our parasympathetic nervous system. So the central nervous system, as you may know, has 2 aspects to it. One is the sympathetic, and the other is the parasympathetic. So the parasympathetic could be considered like the brake in the nervous system. What slows things down to bring you into a low idle state, right? And the sympathetic is what drives things up so that you activate. And it could be associated with things like cortisol, the stress hormone, and a range of hormones in the body that make us able to deal with challenges, right? When you're going into meditation, you want to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And if you're using following the breath, the anapanasati, as a object of meditation, you will unlikely be able to do that very quickly. If you sit there for an hour or two, you might start to slow your breath rate down gradually, but you can actually apply techniques to slow it down right away and to begin to get into the experiencing of the first Shamatha jhana at the very least within 5 minutes. And the reason I say this is because that's exactly what we do in Kriya Yoga. So Kriya Yoga is a form of intentional breathing. It comes out of India. So Kriya Yoga was developed as we know it today in the 1890s. In the Bengal region by a person named Lahiri Baba or Lahiri Mahashai. And it's a form of intentional breathing, but it has a particular unique flavor that makes it really super effective for getting one into a low idle state. And one of the reasons for this is because it brings the breath below a certain threshold, which allows us to get into something called heart rate variability resonance. And what happens is that your breath rate and your heart rate start to become in resonance with each other, and everything starts to slow down. So your breath rate slows down and your heart rate slows down. And the reason this works is because the slow, long out breath that is used in Kriya Yoga stimulates an aspect of our parasympathetic nervous system called the dorsal vagal complex. And the dorsal vagal complex is connected with our brainstem, particularly the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for heart rate. So Kriya Yoga allows us to slow down the breath rate and, by extension, slowing down the heart rate, and you start to then begin to be drawn into a low idle state. Your parasympathetic is becoming predominant, and you start to get this sense withdrawal, and in yoga we call this pratyahara, sense withdrawal or internalization. And this brings on the concentration states, brings on the jhanas very, very quickly. And in Kriya Yoga, it is said that basically when one is doing 12 repetitions of what we call Kriya Pranayam, which is the particular form of intentional breathing, that one starts to be drawn into pratyahara, which is internalization. So immediately you start to experience the first jhana, so the feelings of bliss or glee within the body. And then as a result, your attention becomes more concentrated within. And so Kriya Yoga leads to this state, which is called paravasta, which means the after effect poised state of Kriya. It leads one through the different stages of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which are very similar to the stages in the Shamatha Jhanas. So the point of this is that there are universal processes that happen for people across the world because we all have the same biology. Right? And the same kind of techniques, if practiced in the same ways, will lead to the same results. Right? So Kriya Yoga is an ingenious invention because it leverages the body's central nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system in particular, through a form of intentional breathing that brings one into a low idle state. And it brings on the meditation states, the concentration states, the Shamatha Jhanas. And the thing about Kriya Yoga is that it doesn't just bring on the first Shamatha Jhana, it actually brings you up to the fourth Shamatha Jhana. And this is a state that in yoga we call dharana, a concentration on internalized void. It's basically moving through these successively deeper states of the Shamatha Jhanas, and that is really just a jumping off point into the fifth Shamatha Jhana, which is this boundless space or expansion. So Kriya Yoga, within a very short period of time, can allow you to get into at least the fourth Shamatha Jhana. And it does this so much faster than using the breath as an object, where you're just following the in and out breath, as in anapanasati. So some Buddhist teachers may say that if you use what they call forceful breath, that you would disturb you getting into the Shamatha Jhanas. This is just not true. There are certain breath techniques that don't lead one to get into the Shamatha Jhanas, into what we consider meditation states. Things like Bhastrika Pranayam, which is a very forceful and rapid breath. But a slow form of intentional breathing like Kriya Yoga actually brings you into the Shamatha Jhanas extremely quickly. As I say, the first Shamatha Jhana, 5 minutes. Successive Shamatha Jhanas as you transition into deeper meditation relatively quickly. So if you are a Buddhist meditator and you have been taking quite a while to get into the Shamatha Jhanas, this may be one of the reasons why you're simply breathing too quickly. So there may be some practitioners that really favor Vipassana over concentration practice. And they do it sort of as an afterthought in their development. But it is really very vital when you are able to transition into deeper jhanic states, right, into the fourth or the fifth jhanas, you can then engage in Vipassana because your mind is concentrated and internalized. And from there, you can start to investigate, to inquire into the nature of the sensations that you're experiencing. So following the pathway, the trajectory into the jhanas through a simple form of intentional breathing like Kriya Yoga, and then from there engaging in Vipassana practice is really what I consider as a best practice trajectory that will save you time. If you've been sitting for many, many hours and you're engaging in Vipassana and you start to feel the body in pain and you're shifting around and just observing, that's fine. But really what you're doing is Vipassana or insight into the nature of pain. From my perspective, this is not a very enjoyable practice, and a lot of people would likely give that up. Whereas if you give people a simple and quick route into the Shamatha Jhanas and then teach them how to do Vipassana, you really have made it a much more enjoyable journey. Ultimately, you may be going to the same place, but one is a smoother ride and one is much more bumpy. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.